What is up, everyone? Ronan here, and welcome to part 5 of What If Giovanni Sponsored Ash. But before we get started, I need you guys to do something very important for me. I need you to head over to PlusUltraMan's channel and check out part 4 if you haven't already done that. Then, before you get into part 5, I'm going to need you to head over to the Ranger base with Ranger Rye. He was the one who edited both these videos, and I gotta say, his quality really makes me want to put out a better product. If you haven't already been over to his channel, he does a phenomenal series comparing Pokemon to real-world counterparts and how their inspirations play a big part in their design. So go over there, subscribe, and check out the Ranger logs. Go ahead, pause the video. I'll wait. Alright, now that you've done that, please help spread the word about his channel. I'd really like to get him to 1,000 subs by the end of this month, and I think between the people that are subscribed to my channel and PlusUltraMan's channel, we can make that happen. Anyway, for the reason that you're here, part 5 of What If Giovanni Sponsored Ash. PlusUltraMan has been working very hard on the scripts, and we're sorry that it took so long. So, today we decided to do a double upload for you. I hope you enjoy. A mission? Ash asked curiously. This time, Meowth proudly sat on its trainer's shoulders, as he no longer had any reason to hide being a part of Ash's team. In fact, meeting with a boss like this gave it a real sense of tangible pride. It meant he simultaneously grown enough to be recognized by Giovanni as to be put in complete charge of the mission he, Jesse, James, and even Butch and Cassidy were on. It also meant he'd help Ash grow and advance enough to keep the boss's attention and respect. Yes, a very important one. You've been through Vermilion, so I assume you're aware of the large tournament that's being held on the SS Anne? The gym leader answered, and then looked down at a tablet presumably showing information about the tournament as he continued to brief his student. Your task is to win the entire thing. Ash seemed excited at hearing that, as he had already hoped to do just that, but now was being commissioned by his sponsor, and excitedly began to mention that Richie and Gary were probably going to be there as well, as he noted with a lot more seriousness and determination that he also expected Silver to be there. I'm going to beat him this time, Mr. Giovanni. I'm sure of it, Ash said, full of confidence. Good. Crush Silver, and anyone else in your way. I'll of course be assigning Richie with the same task. Giovanni agreed with a bit too much of a sinister tone and a smirk that put Ash off a little, as he nodded his head a bit nervously and gave a smile to Meowth, who returned it, reassuring him as best he could before Giovanni bid his protege a farewell and cut off his connection. Shaking off the weird feeling he got, Ash decided that he wanted to go ahead and get back in contact with his friends, so he called down to the Vermilion City Pokemon Center. After ringing a few times, the line was picked up by the same tired-looking Nurse Joy he had met there before, who looked noticeably a bit less tired this time. He greeted her and asked if Brock and Misty were around. She nodded before moving to retrieve someone who ended up being Brock, who also looked pretty tired. The two happily caught up over the last 3 or so weeks of time, and to Ash's shock, he was informed that not only had Misty defeated Lieutenant Surge fairly quickly in her rematch, she was also traveling pretty close to Ash over in Celadon City. And even more surprising, the Charmeleon they had met while traveling was with her, having apparently come back looking for its own rematch against Ash and Krokorok. Both sets of news really fired him up and made him excited to meet back up with his buddies. Brock then revealed that he would be finishing up his apprenticeship under Nurse Joy, and that afterwards he would be traveling around the halfway point on Route 6 to camp out and unwind, as the last few weeks had been very rough for him and Nurse Joy due to the criminal group called Team Rocket. That made Ash cock an eyebrow, as he mentioned that he was told Team Rocket was actually a group of heroes, pretty much puzzling Brock. Before they could delve into the topic any further, Brock was called by Nurse Joy, so he told Ash that he'd see him soon, encouraging him to try and meet up with Misty so they can walk down from Saffron and rejoin him before the tournament.
Ash excitedly agreed before cutting off the call and considering all the news he'd just gotten. He was really proud of Misty, and now fired up to have a second chance at getting Charmeleon on the team. Meanwhile, finally in Celadon City, Misty and Surge found themselves in front of its gym. Though strangely, Surge now seemed nervous. Misty wasn't sure as to why, but nonetheless entered the building with him trailing behind her, only to find that the front of the gym was actually a garden, and a perfume-making class was currently being taught by the likes of its gym leader, the beautiful Erica. Surge instantly began to blush, telling Misty why he'd been so nervous earlier. "Do you like Miss Erica, Lieutenant?" she whispered to him as he grunted and shushed her before shaking his head to clear his emotion from his face and raising his voice in his usual bravado to greet his contemporary, who didn't seem too pleased at having her class interrupted, but hid her anger very well, only choosing to greet Surge back with composure before deciding her students could finish their work with one of her gym assistants as she went over to speak with the new arrivals. "Hello again, Surge. I see you still haven't learned any manners," the female gym leader quipped with a small smile and a genuine tone in the spirit of bantering with her peer, as she then noticed Misty and looked as if she recognized her before introducing herself, while Surge again began to blush from her teasing and attention on him. Misty introduced herself with her last name, and after hearing all the praise from Surge lately, took some more pride than she usually did in claiming her title as Kanto's youngest gym leader. To her surprise though, Erica got very excited and began to gush about being good friends with her older sisters and having heard of and seen photos of her before. Regardless, Misty clarified that she was here because she was taking on the league challenge to prove herself better than her stupid sisters, and that the lover boy known as Surge had advised her to keep challenging the gym she was weak against first. This time, both Surge and Erica blushed at the implications, though while Surge expressed his anger at being teased by Misty, Erica stayed perfectly calm except for the small frown now gracing her features, as she began to scold Misty for not only being too forward, but also rude to people she herself had just admitted helped her and had her best interests at heart. That caused Misty to falter a bit, and she finally apologized, as Erica agreed to take her on a battle on one condition. She attended her perfume making class for a few days, since she also taught basic etiquette, and in her view, Misty could really benefit from learning to reserve her emotions and keep calm better. As she was now, she doubted she'd be able to defeat her. Insulted, Misty was about to argue back when Surge ruffled her hair good-naturedly and claimed that he had to second that thought. Erica was strong in a whole other way than he was, and knew not only how to wield power, but also how to wield grace. But that didn't really make sense to Misty. It confused her, as it seemed so out of character for Surge, but nevertheless, she decided to comply. If two strong people she respected saw something that she didn't, it made sense to take her time and look at what they meant to show her. After all, she still had a week before she needed to be back in Vermilion, and while she really didn't want Ash to collect more badges than her so he got more of a confidant, she'd end up losing her high ground if she rushed too. All while Charmeleon seemed exasperated at the call for even more downtime for it, as Erica then looked to the lieutenant after his compliment and asked if he had any plans that night, making Misty giggle to herself as he began to stutter in embarrassment once again.
Meanwhile, on Route 8, a few hours west of Lavender Town, Ash and Meowth began debating the intelligence of the Scratch Cat's latest scheme. Frankly, they were both pretty tired already, and aware they had much more ground to cover with little time to do so. They both agreed it was in their best interest to try and make it over to meet up with Misty as soon as possible, so they could attempt to convince Charmeleon to join the team again, and have a full squad. But sadly, Ace Trainer Jesse and James had moved on to their next destination. In reality, Giovanni had warned the duo to both be careful in that area of the region right now, and to let Ash cover his own ground. He wasn't leaving the actual indoctrination of his proteges to those buffoons anytime soon.
It was a bit strange that Meowth, who was usually so flippant, lazy, and aloof, was so invested in team-building efforts, but he disregarded that thought due to how crazy what he was suggesting was. Meowth was advising that they could make it to Celadon to get Charmeleon, back to Saffron to take on the gym, and then probably back to Celadon again to take on its gym as well, all before the week was out, if they simply flew there on Firo. He admits that he was going to suggest this earlier in the month, but as of yet there'd been no real need to. However, Ash was in opposition to this pretty much immediately, partially out of fear if you were being honest, but also due to his knowing one couldn't exactly just hop on a flying type's back and go zipping around from place to place wherever they wanted. It took time and training, and he was even under the impression one had to receive a permit to do so.
However, his partner countered that as long as it was his Pokemon and they weren't going too far or flying recklessly, it shouldn't be a problem, which admittedly did make sense to him, but he was still hesitant until Meowth swiped Pharaoh's Pokeball from him using Thief and released her, claiming that he should just ask the bird himself. To Meowth's dismay, Pharaoh's motherly instinct told him that it wasn't a good idea, so she sided with Ash initially on the decision. Thinking on his feet though, Meowth viewed Ash having a full and powerful team, as well as earning as many badges as possible, was vital to their completing Giovanni's task, so he poked at Firo's pride, claiming on second thought he wasn't sure that she was a competent enough flyer to keep her trainer safe in the air anyway. While Firo wasn't dumb enough to fall for this jab, she did bristle at Ash, trying to console her as if it had been the truth, getting the reaction that Meowth wanted as she began squawking angrily at the two, and beating her wings to whip up the winds around them as she threw her head towards her back as if to order them to climb on. Egged on by Meowth, Ash conceded and climbed onto his first catch, nervously, before she took off into the air, climbing higher and higher as Ash and Meowth hung on for dear life, screaming in terror, until she began to glide smoothly through the air. By then, the two began to laugh and joke, enjoying how fun and free this felt, as Meowth teased that his trainer should listen to him more often, as they continued to joke at Pharaoh's annoyance, while Meowth began to direct her in the direction of Celadon City, as their first priority was meeting back up with Charmeleon. "Excuse me, young man, are you licensed to fly a Pokemon?" An authoritative voice boomed from above, causing Ash and Meowth to whip around in a panic, to see who had spoken. The quick shifting of the weight and the fact that Pharaoh wasn't used to carrying a trainer resulted in Ash accidentally slipping off her back while yelling in fear as the ground started to grow much closer and closer at high speed. Meowth and Fearow panicked and disregarded whoever called to them in favor of diving towards their trainer with the use of agility. Before the two could reach him though, a Pokeball was tossed past the two that released a massive ancient looking Pokemon that moved at a speed that made Fearow look like Richie's Butterfree in comparison, before easily snatching up Ash and saving him from a painful end, as Meowth and Fearow were forced to pull up at the last minute, resulting in a pretty messy landing for the two of them, as the smaller Pokemon was rolled on top of by Fearow, who squawked angrily at him for getting them in the situation in the first place.
Finally getting his heart to calm itself, Ash realized the Pokemon who'd saved him was an Aerodactyl, and a really well-trained one at that, as he was fairly sure they were usually really hard to handle. "So I'm guessing you weren't certified to fly," the same voice said as Ash and his Pokemon looked to its origins as a man jumped down off of another large and powerful looking Pokemon, a Dragonite, and its trainer was the current Kanto champion, Lance. Whether due to still being shell-shocked or shock at meeting one of his heroes, Ash found himself speechless and then stuttering as the champ returned his prehistoric Pokemon and walked closer to continue his scolding of Ash for doing something so dangerous, before he finally got his thoughts together and exclaimed the obvious to Lance. You're the champion! You're Lance!" he exclaimed. Interrupted from his tirade, the champion couldn't help but chuckle at seeing Ash's childish excitement just mere seconds after a near-death experience, and asked him to introduce himself, which Ash happily did, stating he was a trainer from Pallet Town, sponsored by the Viridian City Gym. That seemed to get Lance's full attention, as he knew Giovanni's reputation, making him curious not just as a trainer, but also as a Pokemon G-Man. As he was well aware, a lot of suspicions about the infamous criminal organization Team Rocket were beginning to point them towards Viridian and Saffron as possible bases of operation, and Ash had just made himself more of a suspect than he already was by flying unlicensed. Keeping his cards close and playing off Ash's excitement to meet him, Lance decides the best way to investigate a kid like him is to test his heart through battle, and so challenges Ash to a one-on-one, citing his interest in testing one of Giovanni's students. While battles with the champion were meant to carry a lot of weight and gravitas, his job and duty to the region were much more important than any silly pride he might have had about that. Simultaneously intimidated and honored that Lance would even spare him the time of day, Ash accepts, knowing he logically couldn't outpower the champion. But just maybe, if he could use his strategies and tactics like Meowth was always encouraging him to do to pull out a win, it would mean he was much closer to his goal than ever, and definitely ready for the Indigo League, much less the SSN tournament. Lance did, however, give him the condition of only wanting to battle his first and strongest Pokemon, though in fairness, that actually really worked for Ash, as he was fairly sure Krokorok was the only member of his team suitable for taking on a Dragonite. As the two trainers separated to begin a battle, Lance and his partner shared a glance that spoke more than most words could, as they agreed to hold back majorly during this battle for the sake of furthering their investigation. Meanwhile, Misty had found herself really struggling under Erica's tutelage at first. Perfume making and etiquette weren't her thing, and for another thing, she was still babysitting Charmeleon, who wasn't very fond of being cooped up in the gym with nothing to do all day, and after nearly the whole month with Misty was growing very impatient for its rematch with Ash and Krokorok. She had tried to convince it to ride back to Vermilion with Lieutenant Surge, but it refused, even after she told it that Ash was planning to return there and not specifically to her. Regardless, it stubbornly stayed put, even though it seemed to hate the boredom. She couldn't blame it though, as the perfume making had lost its interest after the first day. Eric could explain that making perfume was a good lesson for her to learn though, something about the knowledge of when to come on strong and when to be more subtle and reserved. Apparently, this was all about helping to refine and mature her into a lady, and get her over some of her more brash tendencies, as they could hold her back from accomplishing her goal of becoming a water-type Pokemon master. She honestly hadn't believed the hype of that statement, until to her relief, as it provided her and Charmeleon a reprieve from their boredom, another challenger arrived.
Erica mopped the floor with the kid, even when he stacked his team with pretty advantageous Pokemon. His Nidorina, Magmar, and Pidgeotto being defeated by a single Gloom, Erica wielded with grace and power, just as Surge said. At one point, her and her Pokemon were so calm and in sync that she asked Misty to go make them some tea. When she returned, the trainer was fuming and cursing Erica out, while she maintained a serene smile and kindly reminded him that he should go to the Pokemon Center before the poison in his team did major damage, causing the kid to finally grumble and leave. Erica explained that even in the face of disadvantage and adversity, getting getting upset or panicking will only worsen the situation. Her motto was maintaining a calm spirit and a positive outlook, and Misty was beginning to see the benefits of it. After that though, Erica no longer had her attend her classes and gave her 2 assignments. She wanted Misty to start making amends with the people that she didn't get along with very well, and to get in any training and strategizing she meant to do, as she would need to have her battle within the next 2 days, Tuesday or Wednesday, if she had any hope in making it back to Vermilion City by the Friday before the SSN tournament. Meanwhile, after 15 minutes of hammering away at Lance's Dragonite, both sides of the battle had picked up a few things. For Ash, he realized that Krokorok's endurance and sheer speed were way better than he even thought. Another thing he not so much realized, as he had confirmed, is that his Pokemon were nowhere near a champion level at this moment. Lance and Dragonite hadn't moved or even flinched after being hit by huge crunches, stone edges, and revenge attacks. Meanwhile, Lance's sharp eyes studied every movement Krokorok made and every command Ash made, as if he was investigating his—
"That's enough, Dragonite. Finish this without rage," Lance commanded suddenly, and before Ash or his partner could react, a red aura began to surge around Dragonite as it finally moved by crashing its heavy arm into Krokorok's stomach right before it landed another Thunder Fang, and sent it flying back just as Snorlax had, but much more violently. Unable to leave his starter to be injured like that again, Ash was compelled to step in front of his buddy's path and attempt to catch him, only for them both to hit the ground pretty harshly. Thankfully though, it worked, as this time no one was hurt too bad, and Krokorok actually remained conscious and willing to fight, though it was obvious to Ash that he couldn't take another attack from a weak wild Pokemon, much less the champions. Looking back to Lance, he reluctantly forfeits the match. Once again, the champion smiled. What he learned from this battle was first and foremost that a kid this earnest and sincere couldn't have anything to do with the criminal organization. His Pokemon, who he'd seen both try to save his life and battle in near perfect synchronicity with him, and pretty effortlessly at that, obviously weren't stolen, which he suspected when he saw the mature and powerful Fearow the boy commanded, and especially when he'd seen such a foreign starter from a trainer who stated that he was from Kanto. Finally, he'd realized that Ash had some decent talent for battling. Of course, all that match had come down to his Dragonite holding frame as Krokorok's attacks barely budged it, but regardless, he'd shown both good judgment and creativity in his strategies.
Walking over to him, he went about using the stockpile of healing items he kept on himself to restore Krokorok to full health, while stating some of these things to Ash. It was clear he likely wasn't involved with Team Rocket, but that didn't mean he may not have useful information for him. This kid was a Kanto native, with a pretty foreign Pokemon, meaning he either had the skill worthy to be gifted as a starter, had it as a result of pure nepotism, or it was here through likely unsavory means. It was definitely a lead worth following up on a little further, at the very least. He asked to accompany Ash to his further destination for the sole purpose of wanting to pick his brain even further. Back in Celadon, Misty spent the first day free of Erica's teaching to attempt the making of amends that she had been assigned to her. The ultimate goal being fairly obvious: to call home to her sisters and try to make up with him. None of this meant that she actually wanted to do that right away though, so she decided to put that off for right now, and the first call she made was to Brock and Vermilion, in hopes of apologizing for any unnecessary stress she may have caused him, and for her own immature behavior as pointed out to her by Erica, and to an extent, her elder sisters. She also wanted to see if he knew where Ash was, so she can do the same for him, but that was derailed when Nurse Joy informed her that Brock had already moved on after finishing his training. But Brock did happen to mention that he would be waiting to meet up with them just north of Vermilion City. After learning Ash's last call came from Lavender Town, she called there, but again was met with the news that her friend had moved on, which irritated her some, but she noticed she did a much better job at letting her anger go this time, and accepting the situation better than she usually did. Sighing, she called home and was quickly met with the face of Daisy, who seemed genuinely excited to hear from her. Daisy immediately called over the other sisters as soon as the call came through. At first, the girls just wanted a general update from Misty and were curious to how her gym challenge was going. She got quite a kick out of their shock after seeing her Thunder Badge. They even offered to send her a bunch of money if she agreed to grab them a bunch of souvenirs from the Celadon department store. They actually bonded over now all being friends with Erica, funnily enough. The conversation being likely the most positive the family as a whole could remember having in such a long time, therefore made it a lot easier for Misty then to apologize for acting immature and brash sometimes. Their teasing could get annoying, and she really did wish they would lay off her sometimes, but she did love her sisters and genuinely wanted to get along with them. Unfortunately, this was hard when she was always the butt of their jokes. Her sisters, after some slightly shameful looks towards one another, had to agree with the mature logic, so to Misty's relief, Erica's advice had the desired effect, and made Misty feel a lot more confident in being able to move forward in her goals, knowing that her sisters deep down were rooting for her.
The rest of her time she spent doing a bit of training and trying to decide on her battle strategy for her latest gym leader turned mentor figure. She had a strong feeling her pivoting style wouldn't be as effective against Erica as it had against the Lieutenant, as well as having the sneaking suspicion that Erica could find out about it from Surge if she were to simply ask nicely. Even then, against Surge it had only really worked so well due to Surge being such a straightforward battler, who also was a pretty strict type specialist. She wouldn't be facing only one type of attack that could really hurt her Pokemon specifically this time. There would be two if Gloom was anything to go off of. Attacking relentlessly was both Surge's plan for attack and defense, so pivoting was a hard counter for him, but Erica didn't need to attack to win. Also on her plate, Charmeleon hadn't been satisfied or calmed down yet, even as she allowed multiple practice battles against her team. However, it was fairly clear he just wanted to battle against Gyarados. But Misty was a bit hesitant to do that, as she really hadn't spent any time with it ever since she'd used it in the battle against Surge. But with Erica's teachings and the advice that Surge had given her, she was now a bit anxious for her next opportunity to interact with her Gyarados, but knew she couldn't effectively do so with the battle-crazy Fire Lizard around. She definitely hadn't gotten completely over her fear or anything, but she was more confident in her own strength and simply hoped that Gyarados would start to come around and see it himself. Besides, if she was making amends, then it made sense to do so with him as well, especially if the person she was mainly mad at wasn't even around to talk to. Finally, after seeing Misty and her team weren't planning to battle with it anymore, Charmeleon became frustrated and stormed away into the woods. Misty only smirked though, as she knew it would do that eventually, and now it would only nap far enough away so she couldn't see it before coming right back just before she left to join her at the Pokemon Center. She was beginning to think that the fire type was warming up to her, that or he was now spoiled rotten by her. Seeing the opportunity, she quickly released Gyarados onto the dry land, something the Leviathan had been forced to get used to much more often over the past couple of weeks since Misty and her Pokemon wouldn't always have the energy for both training and a trip to the coastline, forming a pretty solid necessity for her to state that boundary to Gyarados and affirm she would still feed it, but that she couldn't always afford to do so where it was most comfortable.
Besides, her team was starting to power up, and they were frankly beginning to leave it behind. Starmie alone was all it took to keep it in line when Misty gave it food, now because of its mastery of Thunderbolt. And ever since Shelter, who also posed a major threat because of its powerful Ice Beam, joined the team, Gyarados had stopped seeming like such an unstoppable monster in her eyes, as she had unfortunately always seen its species after her accident with it as a little kid. Gyarados and that early trauma still scared her to an extent, but recent lessons had enlightened her to the fact that it was partly because she hadn't taken the time to establish a relationship with it in the first place. It was, after all, more than just a big, strong, angry sea serpent. It too was a living creature, like her and the other Pokemon. She and her sisters were very rude to it by not explaining their decision to trade it and Staryu when she looked at it from Gyarados' perspective. He had to learn by being brought out in a totally new place, with new people without warning. That respect that Surge talked about, or the grace to act in the interest of others like Erica had mentioned, or even just the raw, unwavering passion to succeed like Ash had, they'd faltered in providing all of that first, so she never had any right to complain when Gyarados did the same. She had to start reflecting that she was growing. She took in a deep breath as the atrocious Pokemon cautiously confirmed that there were both no food or other Pokemon around. She was cool and collected and tried to approach the stressful situation as Erica and Surge had taught her to do. With a small smile, Misty explained herself to Gyarados and finally went about formally introducing herself and her dream to it, explaining its current predicament as well as apologizing for her past transgressions against it. It snorted in both curiosity and a bit of trace irritation over the initial confusion it had faced, only now being cleared up. It had been super vaguely familiar with both Misty and her sisters, but it had spent most of its life in a Pokeball since evolution. In fact, even its original trainer, Misty's father, was no longer familiar with it. The girl herself now was the only one he had attention and begrudgingly a respect for. In a moment of bravery, Misty reached out her hand to it. Gyarados, after studying it for a bit, leaned down to sniff at it, just before almost allowing her to pet its crest when a snapping in the distance made it glance up, drawing Misty's attention to Charmeleon poking its head around a tree that it had been hiding behind, very obviously given away by the flame on its tail. Right as she was about to call out to it, she could hear Gyarados tensing up on the ground next to her as Charmeleon suddenly came running towards them while growling excitedly. It really wanted to battle Gyarados more than any other of her Pokemon. Misty began to suspect that Charmeleon had been spying on them for a while now, as because it was a pretty intelligent Pokemon, and it really did remind her of Ash because of it. Glancing behind her, Misty asked if Gyarados would be willing to battle with her.
Meanwhile, Lance had agreed to escort Ash back to Celadon if he told him more about Giovanni on the trip there. claiming that the eccentric gym leader was so private that even as the champion, he barely knew anything about him, to which Ash chuckled, agreeing that that was just how his mentor was. Lance had only been able to squeeze so much out of Ash about him though, due to his constant counter-questioning of him on old televised battles to pick his brain on tactics and tips. That or the kid honestly just knew pretty basic information about his mentor. He was currently the only gym leader in Kanto with much of a mystique about him, and Lance found it strange that such a privacy-valuing person would choose to become a trainer sponsor. And from the exact town a lot of recent Team Rocket sightings have been climbing in the last few years, no less. Under normal circumstances, he would have already sped Ash to Celadon and gotten back to base to compile his notes and plan his next move while informing the other G-men. But he'd already had Aerodactyl fly them as slowly as possible, so his questioning could be extensive and yet still friendly and genuine so as not to put Ash off. And he did honestly enjoy the small road trip with his new friend. Ash ended up challenging Dragonite to a battle 3 more times in the 3 days they've been traveling together even, so it definitely wasn't a boring trip. Still though, he could see the kid going a bit stir-crazy due to his wanting to get in as much as he could during the month, so accepting his challenges was the least he could do to tide him over whilst he was being interrogated. The first time, he'd attempted to use his Fearo's greater maturity and power to close the gap between him and Dragonite. It didn't work. And the second, he'd surprised him by actually throwing out an Oddish that attempted to whittle them down with poison and a surprising Moonblast. One day, hit his partner pretty hard actually. That one made them just a little more serious. But it was what Ash did that next morning that really clued him into why Ash was relevant to the elusive Giovanni at all. Lance and he had decided to make camp a little outside of Celadon. It'd been fairly quiet around the area until early that morning as Lance woke up to a booming in the distance and what he recognized as Ash cheering, and then to his alarm crying out in pain. Rushing awake and out of his tent, he found a trail of 6 wild Pokemon unconscious, and at the end of it, he found Ash and Krokorok in a state he hadn't seen the creature in yet. A hazy aura leaked around his body as it looked bulked to the max for some reason. He also noticed the tense atmosphere around that area. Ash's meow seemed extremely concerned about something behind his trainer's back, all while Ash looked tired and sweaty, and winced as he stood still holding a hand behind him, fairly obviously trying to hide something. It was then Lance noticed specks of red on Krokorok's mouth as Ash greeted him and claimed today would be the day that they took a step towards their goals by defeating Lance's ace with the technique they've been working towards mastering since their journey began, the full Moxie boost. Krokorok then stomped on the ground and growled in agreement and anticipation. But the casual way Ash and his Pokemon hurt innocent wild Pokemon to achieve this gave Lance some pause. Were these the kid's true colors revealing themselves finally? And worse, could he keep control of his partner in this state? Lance responded as he decided to indulge Ash a final time. If there was anything hidden in his heart during the prior battles, he was certain it would be revealed during this one, where he seemed to be at his most desperate to overcome him. As Dragonite took the field, he didn't even have a chance to inform it of anything before Ash and Krokorok were on the attack, showing they were definitely in sync at least for now. The ground type sprinted full speed at his Drake before diving with all that built up speed directly into the ground, where he came rocketing up into Dragonite's face to use Crunch. As usual, Dragonite decided not to dodge, as doing so mostly resulted in a larger waste of energy than getting hit, but something new happened this time. Krokorok's fangs began to glow with black energy, and Ash and Lance could even see faint projections of big, gnarly teeth in the same energy around the ground and Dark type as it slammed into its target. A sign that the Crunch attack had developed to its fully mastered and most powerful state.
Lance even heard Dragonite call out in pain from the attack when it hadn't even done so against Ash any time beforehand, even against Oddish's Fairy-type moves. There was a devastating power behind that attack for a trainer and a Pokemon so young. Krokorok, pleased with its strength and its progress, wrapped its arms around the Dragon-type and slung its head back for another heavy crunch when Lance shook his shock off and ordered Dragonite not to hold back and counter with extreme speed. Both the battle-crazed trainer and his Pokemon had their excitement snuffed out as Dragonite not only broke out of Krokorok's hold, but in the same split second went shooting across the small field they were in whilst dragging the Croc against the ground and finally throwing him where he hit the ground before rolling to a stop and struggling to stand. "Call it off, Ash. You won't win like this," Lance ordered sternly. Having not seen this reckless side of the kid yet, he didn't expect his drive to win to be so insatiable, and it was clear that there was a reason for this. Ash looked hesitant as his partner finally made it back to its feet, and he shot Dragonite a defiant look, signing and returning him away. They just weren't there yet. Lance did the same with Dragonite before walking over to join him. Still fairly upset and wanting an explanation, but secretly relieved, Ash had gone no further as to continue battling and endangering his Pokemon. He forced him to reveal the bite wound on his hand and went to treat it while scolding him once more for recklessness. Croak could have seriously wounded him, and it was clear that even though Moxie was a gamble that's well worth taking when your back is against the wall, it wasn't something they were ready for.
Ash could only cite his displeasure with their travel pace and his recent losing streak to Lance as the cause for his drastic idea. And Lance could at least understand that. It was his fault the schedule had changed so drastically, and admittedly this was the most noteworthy thing to come from his investigation into Ash. But he did make sure to remind the kid that he hadn't even collected all the badges he needed to challenge the Indigo League yet, much less his champion, so he was measuring himself up against some pretty unfair odds. Lance eventually got Ash to expand on why he felt like this, and it quickly brought up the topic of his rivals and the Pokemon they wanted from the sponsorship. Rhyhorn was a relatively expected pick that didn't raise his eyebrow, but the part that did was hearing that it had been taken by the grandson of the profound Professor Oak, and after he'd already received one of Kanto's official starters. Trapinch, who could naturally evolve and attain the Dragon type, gave him some pause. From what he knew of that line from one of his rivals in Hoenn, they weren't as overly aggressive and hard to train as most Dragon types, but he still doubted it was a suitable Pokemon to have as a starter. And finally, learning Ash's Sandile was equipped with a hard-to-handle Moxie ability made it very clear that Giovanni was the truly reckless one in his starter selection for children so young. Even as a champion, he probably wouldn't have given anyone under 13 to 14 max their first Pokemon bred from members of his team. So it was definitely a red flag that the Viridian City gym leader was of some suspicion. And the topic of rivals also brought up someone Ash apparently viewed as the strongest rival above them all at the moment, in the likes of Giovanni's own son. The one who'd been set to receive Rhyhorn in the first place and refused it, only to show up a month or so later in Vermilion with a starter from Lance's home region of Johto, as well as an exceptionally brutal and effective talent for Pokemon battling. This lead was beginning to seem a lot more worthwhile, and the champion wasn't pleased about it.
Bringing up that Croak should be properly healed, as all their battling and healing the wild Pokemon they defeated had depleted his supplies, as well as Ash would likely need to start his journey to meet up with his companions soon if they wish to make the tournament. He excuses his earlier slowness to make sure they arrive at the Celadon Pokemon Center to do just that. Croak's injuries were fairly superficial, so his treatment was completed by mid-morning, and Ash from there claimed he'd be searching the city for his friend, who he expected to be at the gym. As that was where Lance was currently headed, he informed him that that's as far as he would travel with Ash, while shaking his hand and expressing a genuine hope to meet him again someday, as well as making a silent promise to get to the bottom of the shadiness going on around Ash, for his sake. Once walking through its doors, Ash could tell a battle was getting started, as he could hear a decent bit of chatter further into the gym, and could even hear its referee stating its terms faintly. He rushed in ahead of Lance and skid to a halt, as he indeed did find what he was looking for in Misty and Charmeleon, and they were going up against Erica, the Celadon Gym's grass-type specialist, in a double battle no less. Misty was actually using her Gyarados, though Ash could tell it must have been with some trepidation. He was still surprised to see that Charmeleon had encountered them again, but even more so that both it and Misty were willing and able to battle together. But that also spoke to her maybe not being so confident in Gyarados so as to have an insurance policy. It was smart, he had to admit, though he decided he would sit back with Lance as to not reveal himself and throw her off her game with the surprise. Erica declared that she was happy to finally be battling Misty, and that she could tell her teachings had finally stuck with the younger woman. She had been hoping for a challenge, and was happy to see Misty presenting one, as the first Pokemon released was the same Gloom Misty had seen earlier, and then a little blue Pokemon with a lily pad on its head she actually had never seen before. As the battle began, Gyarados' Intimidate took effect, even though Misty knew it wouldn't really matter that much. She called for Charmeleon to begin by handling their long-range attacks using its flamethrower, but it instead decided to compete with Gyarados by attempting a Scary Face. Erica and her Pokemon pretty much ignored it, however, as she ordered Gloom to use its Sweet Scent, while using the little blue Pokemon she called Lotad to cover it with the Bubble Beam. Misty had to ask Charmeleon to dodge, only to see it use its flamethrower to destroy the incoming water attack, and to Erica's dismay, roast over the small Pokemon for a good bit before it scuttled away. Misty had to remember who these Pokemon were if she wanted to use them in a battle together. Knowing they both likely wanted to go back on the attack, and that Gyarados was probably hungry for the opportunity to exert some aggression, she ordered them both to charge in with an Ice Fang and a Fire Fang, respectively, which the two did happily, as Erica Erica this time had to go on the defensive and ordered her Pokemon to keep their distance and fire a Sludge Bomb and another Bubble Beam. Charmeleon was a good bit faster than Gyarados, so Misty asked it to run ahead and deflect the attacks away from it, and surprisingly it did so with the use of Flamethrower, and what Ash recognized as the normal type move, Mega Punch, which he had no idea it had learned. Misty also had come to learn that Gyarados also had a competitive spirit and pride in its power, so she ordered it to show Charmeleon that it was still bigger and stronger by attacking Gloom directly and corralling it and Lotad together with an Ice Fang attack.
Both plant-based Pokemon were forced to dodge and avoid as much damage as they could manage, but it was rather obvious they were outpowered, and to Erica that she was out of sync with Lotad. Angry at being shown up by Gyarados, Charmeleon roared at it as Misty ordered it to show what it could do by blasting the biggest flamethrower it could at their opponents. Charmeleon then smirked and puffed its chest to a cartoonish degree as it inhaled air to release a massive gout of flame that, to Misty's horror, also consumed Gyarados' face in its wake as she cried out for Charmeleon to cut it out. When it did, both Erica's Pokemon looked to have barely held on as steam wafted around them due to Erica calling out for Lotad to go wild with water-type attacks and for both Pokemon to leap behind Gyarados for a bit of cover, though it was clearly not foolproof. Misty then called out an apology to Gyarados and tried to order it to shake off the damage when she and Erica noticed two eerie red eyes through the bit of steam and a cloud near his face just as Gyarados began to wildly thrash around unordered. It was the strongest use of the basic normal move Misty had seen from the Leviathan too, as the ground seemed to be quaking a bit from the blows Lotad and Gloom were now forced to endure. Misty couldn't blame for being angry, so she chastised Charmeleon while Erica ordered whatever countermeasures she could muster in the chaos so close to her and her teammates. Lotad, though, was quickly knocked out, and Gyarados had only calmed itself after Gloom blasted in the face point blank with a Sludge Bomb. It seemed to be confused and accidentally slammed its head into the ground trying to retaliate, but Charmeleon was already aiming to stay in the battle and undercut Gyarados by once again firing off a massive flamethrower that proved to be entirely too much for the grass and poison type, and it too was rendered unable to battle. Both Ash and Lance were impressed. Though there were a lot of mistakes and friendly fire going on, Misty was currently wielding a lot of power at a pretty high level. In reflection of that, Erica then stated this was just what she had wanted though. But it was not exactly how she pictured it. She knew when Misty declared her dream was going to be to prove herself different from her older sisters, that she was going to give her a thrilling battle. And as such, her last Pokemon of the match was from her main team.
Having arrived late, Ash and Lance had no idea that this was a 3-on-3 and double battle format until then. But even so, they were even more shocked at recognizing the noticeably larger than average Vileplume Erica released next. With Gyarados still confused and on Erica's portion of the battlefield, Misty felt that she needed to focus her instruction on Charmeleon, so she ordered it to rush in on Vileplume and to keep using all the firepower it had, which it seemed to enjoy and agree with. Erica simply ordered a Petal Blizzard, which caused a storm of flowers to take the brunt of the lizard's flame, before a massive and almost stinking Sludge Bomb was fired back that Charmeleon should have definitely dodged this time because it caused a massive explosion that obscured it from view for a while. At that exact moment though, Vileplume was slammed by Gyarados' tail as it once again writhed in confusion. It wound up landing rather close to where Charmeleon had been hit. At that moment though, it leapt out at Misty's command for a point blank Fire Fang right on its flower. The attack hit home and hit hard, but the creature was extra bulky and didn't seem anywhere near tired as Erica countered by asking for a non-stop Sludge Bomb. From up close, Charmeleon was hammered in its gut and its head over and over with the gunk. Looking at Gyarados, it was clearly just beginning to get its bearings back and couldn't help, but Misty noticed that Charmeleon's tail flame was beginning to grow larger and brighter. She recognized that Blaze was beginning to activate, even though she didn't want it to. She knew the best way to win the battle was to take advantage of it. She called out for Charmeleon to lift the large and stout Pokemon in its jaws and give it the best flamethrower it had ever made. With the flame on its tail raging, Charmeleon felt a surge of energy and welded its strength in its jaws as it squatted down and hoisted Vileplume up hard enough to fling it a good height into the air before it belched an even larger gout of flame towards the grass type as Erica calmly countered by ordering Vileplume not to give up and fire back with a solar beam since it was already getting so hot around the battlefield.
It was a reckless strategy that Misty hadn't expected, but since it was going to be high enough to be bathed in the sun anyway, one which would pay off, as Erica now had an actual expression of genuine passion plastered on her face for the rest of the battle, to Misty's great shock. As Vileplume reached a height to catch the late morning rays of sun, it began to glow bright just as flame consumed it for a good few seconds, only for Vileplume to drop through the flame and slam down to Charmeleon head first as it unleashed its solar beam from point blank range and created a dust cloud for the little crater that it left Charmeleon in. When Vileplume landed, it was obviously burnt badly, though it stood confidently and smirked down at Charmeleon. Misty then suddenly called out for an Ice Fang, snapping Erica and her partner back to the reality of the double battle having made this a 1-on-2 situation, and are caught as the strain on Vileplume hadn't worn off just yet. The Ice-type attack obviously took another toll on Vileplume, but was more than willing to keep going, as Erica ordered another Petal Blizzard, allowing it to escape the Water-type's jaws, and it was quickly made apparent that Gyarados needed more battle experience, as the high-level Vileplume put it down as well, finally bringing the competition back to a 1-on-1. Misty had already decided on her newly caught Shelter as her third team member in this battle, due to his powerful Ice Beam attack, but just before she could get it on the field, Erica's Vileplume was consumed by flames for a second, as if its burn had suddenly worsened tenfold, just as it flopped to the ground face first, and the referee called out Misty's victory. Erica sighed as she returned Vileplume, though smiled happily towards Misty and beckoned her over to her. The younger girl had been frowning ever since Charmeleon's blaze had activated, as she met her older friend in the center of the field. Erica praised that as the most exhilarating battle she'd had since she'd become the gym leader of Celadon, and thanked Misty as she offered her the rainbow badge. However, Misty refused it. Just then, to her surprise, the ground where Charmeleon had been blown into a small crater broke up as Croc came digging from under it and brought the fire type up in a fireman's carry while repairing the crater under his feet.
That was an awesome battle, Misty. Erica and her both looked to the exit of the gym field where stood her no-good friend in the flesh, and he was adorned by his mangy Meowth as usual. She realized she had actually begun to miss him for a little bit as his big grin became infectious, and she couldn't help but smile at herself, only for it to falter. No, Ash, I could have done better. First, I relied on Charmeleon, who isn't even my Pokemon, or even a water type. The whole point of seeking Erica out was to prove that a water type specialist could take on their biggest weakness, and Charmeleon did the majority of the work in the battle. Gyarados and I are only just now starting to see eye to eye, and I shouldn't have put it under that much pressure in the first battle. So Erica, I cannot accept this badge today. I'm sorry. That sounds like an excellent judgment, young lady, she heard, and finally realized that Ash was being accompanied by somebody when her jaw dropped a little, and she was shocked to realize that it was the champion. She must have really missed Ash, because she hadn't even noticed at first. Erica concurred, though could respect Misty's assessment of herself. She then offered a consultation. She wanted to give Misty the Pokemon she had used in battle, Lotad. It was actually a common foreign Pokemon she had caught while on vacation with her older sisters on the beaches of Hoenn, as it was a dual water and grass type Pokemon. Misty was surprised and brought up that she felt it would be better to speak with Lotad before its ownership changed hands in any major ways, but Erica assured her that it would be alright, as Lotad and her just seemed not to have that much chemistry. Erica may try to tame another one someday. However, this one didn't seem to show any type of attachment towards her, so it should be fine.
Freshly restocked on supplies, Lance offered Misty and Ash both a revive for Charmeleon and Lotad respectively, as he suggested they make haste on their way back to Vermilion. The two said their goodbyes to the people who'd served as their second mentor figures during the events of their month apart, and took their leave as Lance hung back with Erica. "You seem to really enjoy that battle, Agent Erica." "Well, Misty is the younger sibling to dear friends of mine. I couldn't possibly hold back completely when giving her a gym battle now, could I? That wouldn't make me a good elder sister," she responded without missing a beat, as she and Lance retired to her private office in the gym while she gave Vileplume and Gloom to one of her assistants to go and have healed. Ash and Misty had at first walked together in a small awkward silence. They both had so much to tell the other, and had already spoken at the same time 3 times in a row, making them both laugh nervously. Ash finally gave a soft question of how many badges she collected during the month, and Misty responded that she'd sadly only gotten 1. It could have been 2 if she wasn't so prideful about beating Erica. Combined with her Boulder badge, and if she counted one of the gimme badges she'd taken from Cerulean, then she was currently in possession of 4 badges in total. Though she admitted she'd been waiting for their full 6-on-6 to claim the Cascade badge, since she had grabbed one for him as well. They treat each other as their Cerulean City gym battles, pretty much. Ash grinned at the idea, and thanked her for thinking ahead for him, to which she gracefully claimed was only her duty as Cerulean City gym leader, with a kind smile before giving him the same questioning regarding badges. Ash excitedly regaled her about his reunion with Richie and introduction to the secret gyms. Misty was already aware of them. She revealed that they were mostly a set of old places where gyms used to operate, that just employed a strong trainer powerful enough to remain qualified for certification, or that hadn't retired yet. They weren't usually encouraged for the route of a first-time trainer due to that strength, but of course Ash and his rivals didn't care about anything like that. They were just motivated by the challenge itself. She was actually pretty enthralled by the story of Ash's journey to overcome Mr. Fuji's Snorlax, and his short trip to Saffron to learn under the Karate Master, and of course when he detailed his 3 epic battles against Lance over the majority of this week. All in all, he currently had 4 badges himself, though only 3 of them actually counted for anything.
Around that time, Crocro began complaining about lugging Charmeleon around loud enough that Misty and Ash stopped their conversation to commence the revival of their hopeful 6 team members. Lotad awoke and scuttled about before looking up to Misty as she knelt down to introduce herself and explain the current predicament. She then asked if Lotad would like to come on a journey with her and help her become a powerful water-type master. It nodded happily before using a water gun in her face and scuttling around while laughing at her, as she laughed tensely herself and returned it, trying to hold back her anger at now having a prankster on her team as well. Behind her, Ash had revived Charmeleon, who woke up with a start and a burning energy as it hadn't been knocked unconscious a bit brutally only hours earlier. However, it did seem genuinely excited and happy to realize that Ash was back, only to get aggressive when it saw its rival once again, as well in the form of his smug-looking Krokorok, who Meowth had decided to jump on its shoulders instead of its trainers. The 2 reptiles grunted at one another and were instantly in each other's face, raring for a battle, when Ash and Meowth cut them off. The kid then stood and produced Charmeleon's Pokeball from his backpack while explaining to it finally what happened to Damien and why it was technically still seen as a captured Pokemon. Beyond that, he was unfortunately asking Charmeleon to put aside his rivalry with his ace for now and making it aware that the offer to join his team was still open. As for right now though, there was somewhere they had to hurry where a whole bunch of strong trainers were. Ash already suspected that Krokorok and he had grown a decent bit past the fire type, even in the recognition of the strength it built. And after this competition, he was sure they'd even be more powerful than that. He really wanted Charmeleon to come along with him, so Krokorok and it could push each other to a brand new level of power, and can personally understand the gospel of the throttle mentality it had. It was a big reason to why he really liked it as a Pokemon. But if he learned anything in the last month, it was you can't rush on your journey to getting stronger, especially not alone. Charmeleon seemed to be considering what Ash had been saying as it looked to Meowth and Krokorok, who both happened to smirk at it, and then to Misty, who was giving it a big, genuine smile and nodding excitedly.
This time, without reluctance, it nodded his head at Ash, who smiled and destroyed Charmeleon's old Pokeball under his foot before offering it a brand new one to symbolize their partnership being a total overhaul of what it dealt with its first trainer. With that done, Ash and Misty had full excuse to book it on their way down towards Vermilion City, both eager to continue catching up with one another and excited to do the same with Brock inevitably. They soon found themselves in a location called Hop 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 Town, where while resting at his Pokemon Center for the night, ended up quickly helping to clean up a mess caused by a wild Drowsy. And these events would actually see Misty accidentally catching a Psyduck she had absolutely no interest in, only for it to be transported back home as she now had 6 Pokemon anyway. She was hoping it would simply stay in his Pokeball. Well, Ash actually lucked out during the trip out of the city and onto the long string of beachfront that was at the site of the lighthouse near Vermilion. There, he finally made good on his promise to catch a powerful water type, when he discovered a large Poliwag, which absolutely dominated a Krabby in a small territorial dispute, and quickly had Meowth battle it to add it to the team as well.
When his Pokédex asked him to select whether or not to add it to his team, he surprisingly agreed to it and select Pharaoh as his first Pokemon ever to be caught to be sent back to Giovanni. She was still a good bit stronger level-wise than the rest of her teammates, and this would be a good way to bond with other new team members while getting the rest of the squad up to par with her. Not long after, on Thursday evening, they finally made their way back to Route 6, where Brock was indeed waiting for them. The 3 happily reunited and enjoyed a dinner to catch up. Brock seemed really impressed and proud of their growth. He encouraged them to keep climbing higher, as he definitely improved his caretaking skills so that he could support them and the Pokemon they battle from here on out.
That morning, he also decided that the rush warranted a good excuse to bust out Onix for the group to ride on the way back to Vermilion. He learned during his apprenticeship that it and Golem were beginning to weaken due to inactivity, and so revealed he'd actually entered himself into the SSN tournament as well, while they'd been gone. Because of this, they ended up making it back to Vermilion in no time flat. The town was currently bustling, as it seemed the buzz around the tournament seemed to be drumming up a lot more tourism as of recent. They even had trouble booking 2 rooms in the Pokemon Center, and were instead forced to all share one for their last night before setting sail that morning at 10 a.m. Brock then made sure that they all got up early in the next morning at 8 a.m. instead, so to compensate for Ash's oversleeping habit, and because he revealed there was somewhere he wanted to take them as they waited to board the ship that morning. Over the month, he'd actually taken care of some Pokemon belonging to the chairman of the Pokemon fan club, and been invited to join the club for a thank you breakfast buffet sometime. So he thought today would be the best day to take them up on that, since he wasn't the biggest fan of Pokemon Center food, and if he were being honest, this was a good way for the crew to fuel up before the tournament without burning their energy to cook their own meal. It turned out to be a great decision, as the club's mostly older membership had some truly talented cooks among them, who made a feast of awesome breakfast food that the trainers and their Pokemon enjoyed immensely. During the meal, one of the fan club members came up to Meowth and started to call it a very handsome Sneasel, to both it and Ash's confusion. The chairman then leaned over to explain that the woman was nearly blind and actually suffered a bit of dementia, sadly. However, the woman is still very nice nonetheless, and she reminisced her time in the snowy peaks of her home region of Sinnoh, mentioning her love to play with the wild Sneasel in the village as one came to be her partner Pokemon. She then stated that she had the perfect gift for Meowth and placed a sharp claw-shaped stone in his paw. The chairman congratulated Ash and revealed the item as a Razor Claw. It was typically used for evolving the Sneasel species, though it also had the effect of increasing a Pokemon's critical hit ratio.
Meowth and Ash then smile at each other deviously as their experiment with the King's Rock against Fuji's Snorlax had bore them some impressive results. They wondered what the claw could do in tandem with Slash. When their meal had concluded, Brock had been assured that they took extra time to help the elderly club members clean up the mess that they had made before they left, and thankfully, it only took them about 5 or 10 minutes. Just as they were leaving, they bumped into an older, well-dressed man who apologized and excused himself past them into the club. Ash could have sworn he had seen him before, but couldn't dwell on it, as he and his friends rushed to get in line to board the boat. They weren't first in line and didn't see anyone they particularly recognized until in line behind them came the likes of Joe and Giselle from Pokemon Tech. Unlike in canon, Ash's skill especially caused her to develop a bit of a crush on him, so she reveals she joined Joe on his journey hoping to get a chance to rematch him. The familiar face of AJ was then spotted, and he revealed his desire to crush Ash and Misty and begin a whole new win streak. More and more trainers and simple guests showed up behind them in line, but Ash still hadn't seen who he'd been hoping to see until a cloaked figure appeared in the line. He stared at it for a bit until a familiar, snarky voice sounded from the figure, who revealed itself to be none other than Gary Oak in the flesh. He bragged that he wasn't sure if Ash was going to have the confidence in himself to enter, only for Ash to quip back that he wasn't going to accept a tie this time, and informed him that he had tons of rivals participating in this. Just then, at the end of the horizon, 2 people arrived. One, he quickly realized to be Richie, who excitedly ran ahead of the other person, who slowed down, creating a lot of distance between the two. As the person grew closer, Ash recognized the person as Silver. He couldn't help but to growl to himself, making Silver look to where he had, and smirk a bit to himself at the challenge that this tournament was about to impose. By 11, everyone's tickets and tournament entries were verified and they began finding their way to the cabins. Their first round was slated to begin at noon that day due to the brackets being drawn up that morning. Lots of tournament participants and normal passengers spent their time before the entertainment began socializing and enjoying the ship's many accommodations like the onboard trading machine it held, or even getting their Pokemon checked out by the onboard Nurse Joy. Ash and company spent their time excitedly catching up and bantering with his rivals who were in usual spirits. Gary's cocky confidence was at full throttle to the point that he wasn't even fazed by Ash, Misty, and Richie teasing him for arriving in a cloak like some manga character. Richie, as usual, was endlessly optimistic and mentioned enjoy being around people that weren't such killjoys like Silver, explaining he had actually run into him when he took on Sabrina at the Saffron City gym and had decided to stick with him until he finally relented and accepted his challenge for a battle.
Silver, from the corner of the room he'd chosen to occupy that the others had to his annoyance slowly gathered in, scoffed at Richie mentioning their spending the last week or so together. He didn't appreciate the company or that his competition would have much of an idea what he was capable of and what Pokemon he used. He was on a mission after all, and didn't have time for the kind of distractions Ash and these other fools did. Richie though heard him and quickly involved him in the conversation with more teasing and mentioned that he was almost certain Silver had enjoyed the company. The redhead snapped back that he was more so a thorn in his side than any kind of company. But Richie brought up that after they both lost to Sabrina, it was probably a good thing that they got to travel and motivate each other before the tournament. Ash, still curious about the mysterious gym leader, asked the other 2 boys how those battles went, only to get a grunt from Silver and a sweat drop from the boy similar to him. Richie elaborated that the Saffron City gym leader was insanely strong and blatantly wiped the floor with both of them. Silver had gotten it a bit worse due to being pretty rude to her though, he joked, only to have Silver shush him once more as the announcer took to the battlefield constructed in the middle of the ship to begin the festivities, as referees of Psychic-type Pokemon went ahead and erected barriers to keep the crowd and ship safe during the contest. Everyone's attention was then brought to a screen which currently showed the tournament's 32 participants. Ash became excited when he recognized the ace trainers who'd gifted him Meowth were participating, as Richie commented that 2 of the other contestants seemed to be kind of familiar to him. Silver again scoffed at them for being so dense, and focused back on the announcer as the rules were laid out. Since the tournament had 32 participants, they'd be conducting it in a series of 5 rounds over the next 3 days. Round 1 was simply going to be one-on-one battles, and the winners would move on to round 2, which would be 2-on-2s. The next day, though, the winners would participate in round 3, which would be a double battle. The final 4 contestants in the semifinals would go on to battle in a 3-on-3 to close out the second day. And then the 2 finalists would finish off the tournament the next day in a 4-on-4 that would involve the first half of 2-on-2 single battles and a second half that would end in another double battle. When it was clear that everyone understood what would be going on in the tournament, the announcer then stated that the tournament brackets were finally ready to be revealed. As they came up on screen, Ash realized he was up first and excitedly took to the field as his friends and rivals watched closely, while another trainer around Brock's age or so took to the other side as the announcer gave their stats and hometowns, mentioning the guy was a trainer named Hodge from Lava Ridge Town in the Hoenn region, surprisingly having rode the ship from the port of Dewford specifically to participate here today. As Hodge released his Pokemon for the one-on-one battle, Ash and Meowth were fairly surprised to not really recognize him, this being one of those rare times when Ash actually had to check his Pokédex, which he really didn't do all too much after Professor Oak had familiarized him much more with Kanto's Pokemon. Once learning the big bulky creature wasn't another form or evolution of Snorlax like they had been seeing in their nightmares for a little while there after battling Mr. Fuji twice, Ash decided he'd actually be best served using Meowth against this fighting type, since it was out of its Pokeball already and would allow him to keep his Pokemon unknown to the competition.
His rivals and friends actually groaned at the decision, all expecting Meowth to simply be too lazy to battle, as it usually was, only to be surprised as it stiffly saluted him and hopped on his shoulder, ready for battle. While he would usually protest battling something he was weak against, after a week around the Kanto champion and some of his Pokemon, he had gotten a lot better at sizing up power. This Hariyama thing was big, but it wasn't anywhere in the same league as Snorlax or Dragonite. It may not even be as strong as Krokorok the more he looked at it, trying to interrogate him as the match began. As soon as he was given the option, Ash called for Meowth to use a combo that they had been working on called Fake Slash, which simply mixes the priority rush of Fake Out with the power of Slash. Hodge was about to call for his own counterattack when he blinked as Ash's Meowth had already landed behind Hariyama and retracted its claws. He called for Hariyama to turn around and clobber it with Arm Thrust, but it collapsed face first as Meowth casually walked back to its trainer and basked in the praise as Hariyama was deemed unable to battle, and Hodge was eliminated from the tournament that quickly. It was hard to find a jaw on the boat that hadn't dropped at the incredibly quick Ash, as he had just set the tone for this to be a more than interesting tournament. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to interact more with me, don't forget to join the Discord and follow me on Twitter. And if you want to support me any further, head over to my Patreon. Just $5 a month gets you 1 week early access to all of my videos. These awesome people have already donated, so I can continue to bring you the content that you love. The links for all of these are in the description below. Anyway, I'm Ronan Charizard, and I'll see you in the next video.